Hello, everyone, and welcome back to They Don't Teach This in Law School. I'm your host, Charlie Mann of law firm Alchemy. And my guest today is the one person who has ever recognized a small little toy that I have sitting here in my office. If you're listening to this, you have no clue what it is. If you're seeing it on video, I'm not sure if you can see it or not. We'll talk about this small moment that we had in connecting, but he's someone who has a really awesome energy level to him, and something that literally just seeing pictures of him on social media, I think I'm interested in connecting with this guy. There's something about him. Now, he also shares a first name with my brother, so I'm sure that helped grease the skids. I'm wanting to make the connection. And I have actually used his law firm to help get some trademark work done in my practice. That might actually, or in my business, that might give it away. But I have with me today of Indie Law and Skybreaker Group, Joey Vitale. Joey, awesome to have you, man.
Charlie, I am so excited and honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is going to be a blast. I feel like you and I just like looking at each other, we're always threatening to break out into like a joint giggle about something. Like that's just the energy and vibe here. And I like it.
Yes. Get ready, folks. On the podcast, you might be missing out on us breaking into song and dance.
Yeah. Okay. Look, I'm a terrible singer, but if we have to go there, I will join you with
Oh my gosh.
enthusiasm and little talent.
Charlie, I was kidding, but we are so similar because I never sing. Like even in the shower, even when I'm just with my wife, and she's like, Joey, I feel weird that we've been together for 10 years and I've never heard you sing. And I'm like, I've never really heard myself sing. It's not great.
I feel like we should just set aside a moment here and be like, Joey, what do you mean you've never heard yourself? That feels like a real coaching moment that we could, but we're not going to go into that digression.
I feel like that's going to be one of our things for next year. But yes, yeah, thanks for pushing that back a little bit longer.
Absolutely. Okay, so Joey, what's the one thing they don't teach you in law school?
The one thing that they don't teach you in law school is that if you decide to build a law firm, it's not about making money. It's about building a machine that makes money.
So that's real like entrepreneur level stuff. When you say machine that makes you money, immediately the word entrepreneur comes to mind. So dig into that for me. What do you mean about building a machine? Because that sounds kind of clinical in a profession that is designed to serve people.
Yes, so I get a lot of pushback on that from new and sometimes even older lawyers, because they're like, no, what about the art and craft of what we're doing?
Yeah.
And to that, I say, you have a responsibility to consistently deliver a quality experience. Whether you're always on those files, or whether you're on vacation, or if something happens to you and you're in the hospital for 2 weeks, like it happened with me, and that's part of my story, your clients still need to have that level of service. And beyond even the delivery of services, you need to be attracting, intaking, converting people so that you can help them well. And that is something that I just keep learning at a higher level each year of, oh, if we didn't hit our goals, it's because there's a part of the machine of our business that still needs fine-tuning.
Okay, I have to ask, because you mentioned that 2-week thing and your own story. So one, I'm interested in the story itself, and two, I'm interested if that was kind of a turning point and what changed from there.
Yeah, it was a huge turning point. So about a year into running my law firm, I should also say that I spent 2 years after I graduated law school working at a mid-sized firm in St. Louis, and they were great. There wasn't a lot of opportunity for me to do work unsupervised. So as I'm sure some of you can imagine, I spent the first 2 years doing a lot of legal research, writing. I sat in a few depositions, but there were a lot of touch points and supervision layers between me and the clients. And so when I started out on my own, it was my first experience working directly with clients. And I loved it, but it was also a lot of stress that I wasn't used to. And for anyone out there who feels like you can feel the weight of your client's stress on your shoulders, like I get that 100%. And it got to a point during my first year when I was working with the clients, I was having just business concerns of working towards a goal. And it got to a point where I started having panic attack after panic attack after panic attack. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. Long story, very short. The doctors found out that I have a very rare allergy against most anti-anxiety medications.
Whoa.
So once they figured out that that was the cause of what was making it worse, they changed things. I made a pretty quick recovery at the hospital, but the doctor said, Joey, you have to do everything you can to reduce your stress levels, because if we have to see you again, we're very limited in our ability to treat you.
Oh my gosh.
And so
That's wild.
I had 2 major breakthrough moments from that. One was, even though I wasn't even 30 yet, I had this experience of, oh, something could happen to me. And if it does, my clients need to be taken care of. And how can I then start to create something that doesn't depend on me so that we can consistently deliver high service?
Wow. That's so fascinating, the idea that the quote unquote cure for what was ailing you was actually the thing that was going to exacerbate it and make it worse.
Yes.
That's a massive life metaphor somehow there that we could probably unpack for 2 hours. But on top of that, you have doctors delivering to you the news like, hey, you entrepreneur, business owner, you have to reduce your stress. You can't add any more to it. What did you start what did you look for in that moment to make a change? And then what changes did you start making?
Yeah. Well, 2 things come to mind. One is I knew that I needed help. And at the same time, I couldn't afford to bring in a lot of teammates. So that was when I really started to look into the world of virtual assistants. And it changed my life. It changed my business. And now I'm just so lucky to have our Skybreaker brand that helps other law firms and business owners get peace of mind with great VA support. That was just a very just breakthrough after breakthrough of finding different ways to have a virtual assistant who I could hire in a very ethical way. It was very win-win for everybody, paid them good for where they lived, and it really started to get me out of the weeds. I also started learning that if I wanted to stress less, I had to stop caring so deeply about every little thing that was happening. And that's also this part of building a machine, is detaching yourself from the highs and the lows of the business. And it's been an amazing journey that I think sometimes, if from the outside looking in, it can look a little odd, or like people are using their sense of compassion or heart. But I could not run the law firm that I now run if I continued to worry so much about every single thing in the business and take everything so personally. And I know that I have to continue to let that go as the businesses elevate.
A lot of people are not going to end up having a 2-week health crisis that kind of kickstarts this particular journey. But I know that there are people who listen to this podcast who want to make this transformation, and hopefully it doesn't require something dramatic.
Right.
If you were able to, what would have gotten yourself before that hospitalization to maybe open your eyes and affect change that could have prevented that outcome? It's an elaborate way for me to ask, what would you tell your younger self? But I went into a more detailed, unnecessary version.
I think that's great. It sounds corny, but so much of this is mindset. And yes, we can dial into specific strategies and tips, but in order for the business to operate well, in order for my team to operate well, I need to, as much as possible, keep a positive attitude, stay grateful, and maintain a low temperature around things. And I would have told myself, long story short, that I would have said, start tracking when you're really worried, write that down, and then check a week later and see if it's still worrying you. Because so many of the things that were freaking me out, and it still happens now, within a couple of days to a week, I go by and I'm like, man, that concern was not worth me ruining my day over.
I know the feeling. Increasingly so since opening Law Firm Alchemy. I know that feeling of having that concern and learning to recognize faster and faster. And this is so important for all of the firm owners that we work with, right? To recognize that concern and realize most of the things that you're worried about, they're absolutely inconsequential. And you're worried about someone thinking something that they're not thinking about you or your business or anything at the time. They're busy with their own problems.
Right.
But we want to believe that somehow, isn't it weird, Joey, that somehow we want to believe that we are a problem for another person? Because then at least they're thinking about us.
Right.
We're so messed up.
I know that is really, I love that. I was with a group of friends. I love that we keep going back to singing and dancing. But when I was in 7th grade, there was this really odd thing that we did in St. Louis where there was this mixer for 7th and 8th graders. I don't know why I'm sharing. I haven't talked about this in years, but if you're from St. Louis, you know, there was this, there are all these mixers that are really popular for 7th and 8th graders to go to. And there was one in particular right by my house called Resurrection, which during the day is a church and a preschool. But one Friday night a month, it's like a club for 7th graders.
Awesome.
And I remember going there and I was with a group of guys and one guy was just like dancing like crazy. And all of us were just kind of looking at him and really shy. And one of my buddies was like, hey, like, how are you dancing like that? Like, aren't you embarrassed? And he was like, no one is looking at me right now. And then that just clicked for all of us. And then we started like getting crazy together and just had a ton of fun. And so I love that point of like, no one is watching you as much as you might think or fear. And that can be really freeing.
Yep.
There's also this visual that I continue to come back to. I think that a lot of us have heard of this idea of like failure is good and fail often and all of that, but it can be kind of tricky to like live into that. There was a book that I read that for me gave a really helpful visual of we tend to think of ourselves in the middle between failure and success. And in order for us to be successful, we need to not be failing. But it's actually we are on one side and success is on the other side and failure is in the middle. And we have to go through failure in order to succeed.
And then
and that is something that I continue to go back to of, oh, if something didn't work well, yeah, I might give myself like 15 minutes to complain about it. But at the end of the day, that is a good sign because me clocking that means that we're moving in a healthy direction.
I feel like I recently saw research, Joey, about venting and that it is a healthy exercise to give yourself a limited space. And actually, I think that there was a timeline where they said, depending on the activity, it's like give yourself 90 seconds to go all out vent and then redistribute that energy. Just like let all of it out. And then it's the equivalent, it's a semi-equivalent of writing down the issue and in order to process it. And then you can discharge that energy. Both of those are really beneficial exercises.
Awesome.
Yeah. So look, I would be bad at my job of hosting a podcast in which I have Joey on here, and I didn't make sure that we jump back to the VA structure, because I know that there are people who will listen to this specifically because the idea of developing a machine, having VAs, we sort of went into that whole leap of faith scenario mindset. You would push yourself into it from the perspective of someone who now has more VAs working for you. A lot of folks, they're looking to get their first VA, or they're looking to get it right. Maybe they hired someone, they go, this was not the right fit. I didn't do the math ahead of time. So someone who's looking to get into this space, whether from an in-depth or very 30,000 foot view, what advice do you give someone who's entering the, I'm curious about VAs, I want to hire them space?
First off, just to clear the air, it is never too soon to look for a VA. And by the way, you can always put out job postings, work with someone, and ultimately decide not to accept any of the candidates that you interviewed.
Amen. Every private client who's heard me say that, you heard Joey say it as well. That's reinforcement, right? Right? Yes, I love that, Joey.
And we are not putting out job postings every month for ourselves without a very clear need, just to see what's out there. Also, please fight any urge of, oh, I need to like clean things up before I bring a VA on board. Like my systems are messy or non-existent, so let me focus on that first, and then I'll bring a VA in. That's like cleaning your house before you have a cleaning service come over. Like, I know sometimes we all do it, but it doesn't make any sense.
My mother did that when I was growing up. Yeah,
I've been there too, and I get it, but let your ego go to the side there, because that's what you're paying them to help you with. And if you don't know what a VA could do for you, let's start there, where you can have Zoom meetings or just video recordings of here is the mess. Help me turn this stuff into a cleaner process and SOP that you can execute on in the future.
I think a lot of law firm owners, when they hear that idea, their concern is maybe they've been willing to set the ego to the side, which I agree that that's a key component here. Let's shift the ego to the side. Who cares? I mean, who's this VA going to go and tell anyways? It's not that big of a deal.
Right.
The bigger question, I think, at that point, if we agree the ego is set aside, is how do I even help a VA start sorting out this mess when maybe I don't even recognize what the mess looks like?
Yeah. So one of the reasons why we built Skybreaker the way that we did, we intentionally made it not a staffing agency, because most staffing agencies, understandably, require that when you bring on a VA, you have them work full time for you. And if you're ready to make that happen, great. But we have a lot of customers that we help intentionally bring on a very part-time VA to start.
Okay.
My first VA was 5 hours a month.
Oh, really?
And at the time, I mean, AI Zapier wasn't as big, so it was just stuff that I couldn't figure out how to automate that he would do, like create client folders when we got a new client set up.
That's really interesting, because that's something that, for me, it was when I hired my VA, who's my executive assistant. I went full bore, like get the full-time person and figure it out. And the idea of 5 hours per month, that's not a structure that I usually operate in. So I'm actually really curious to peel that back a little bit and see what's underneath that, or turn that rock over. So 5 hours a month. How did you determine what needed to be done? How did you source that type of person?
Well, it started with, I'll just be very transparent about the fact that this wasn't a super intentional planned out thing.
Fair enough. I love the honesty.
I was making, at the time, I was getting maybe 1 or 2 clients a month, starting to pay myself. And I was like, look, I found this person in the Philippines. They agreed to $6 an hour. And I was like, 6 times 5, I can pay you $30. And so it was just, hey, I'm going to pay you $30 a month, no matter what. And there might be months where I don't give you anything, but we can start there. And if I do start sending you work that is more than 5, just let me know and we can do an extra invoice around that, or you can clock it.
Mm.
And so it started out with me not really knowing what to send them, but thinking, oh, how can you, I don't quite know how to automatically create a Google folder when someone signs up, since we use Google Drive. And so
Yeah.
they would just set that up. One thing that we started doing that was really great was we had weekly meetings where we just looked at my calendar together for the current week and the following week, which can be a great executive assistant task.
Yep.
I found that it's really great to have your first VA be a like phase 1 executive assistant.
Yes.
And those meetings are great because we essentially got rid of my need to have a separate to-do list, because I just came to the meeting with, hey, here's some notes that I have, or let me brain dump on this meeting for a while, and then get those things that I need to do on my calendar.
I like that. Okay, so you have someone who starts managing your calendar. That's an interesting framework. Here's a brain dump. Now I need you, my VA, to start organizing how this gets done. That's one of those areas where even I think for myself, when I start thinking about how something has to get done, even the language I'm processing with now, I'm thinking about how it has to get done rather than how it could be done. How did you start letting go of that process and allowing the VA to take over? Or what was that transition like? How did that happen?
Yeah. Well, I think one thing with any teammate that's just particularly true with VAs in other countries is they do tend to be very agreeable towards you and deferential towards you.
Mm-hmm.
And I say that because one thing that I'm working towards continually with my executive assistant and certain teammates is for them to hold my feet to the fire when I don't honor my promises, or I don't show up, or
Right.
I want to cancel the call and they're like, no, Joey, we're doing it anyways.
Yeah.
And so that's something that, especially at a VA level, I've learned that I have to kind of train them up and build that confidence up with them.
Mm.
But I do think that as helpful as ideas and systems and templates and other stuff that you can get out there, I'm a huge fan, and we have systems that can help you clarify this, but just having conversations with the VA saying, hey, especially if they've been a VA before, saying, what type of work have you done before? What do you like? What don't you like?
Mm-hmm.
And one of my favorite questions to ask during the interview is, let's fast forward a year. And you're out with your buddies, they're asking you about this job, and you just get a big smile on your face and say, it's the best company I've ever worked with. What would have to be true about us for you to say that?
Mm.
And a lot of times when you make it that kind of a conversation, that is where you can get some seeds of an idea that can turn into consistent work for them.
That's really okay. So I love that. And by the way, I love that question for literally anyone that you're thinking about hiring, right? It's what's the phrase I used to use, or the question I used to use was, what would cause you to leave in 6 months and what would cause you to stay for 6 years?
Oh, nice.
And to be fair, I could have said 5 years on the back half of that question, but I wanted it to be 6 and 6, and it just
I
seemed
think
better.
that's great.
Yeah. So with your VAs, how much of the work is done synchronously? And for those, like, we might use VA lingo here. So for those who aren't adjusted to it, synchronously, like on the same time zone, working in sync with you, versus asynchronously, where you might have people who work off our schedule, or communications are done without, rapid fire feedback. So how much of it is synchronous versus async for you?
It's a good mix of both. I will say that more and more VAs across the world, but especially in the Philippines where we like to source, it is becoming much more common there for a VA to intentionally work the night shift. by choice.
Yeah.
We don't have, because we've had our VAs for a while. I don't think that was as popular as when we first brought them on board. We also have teammates in Central America and in closer to US time zone hours that get work done. That said, one thing that we always just see as a major victory when we work with not just placing VAs with our customers, but we have training programs to help them level up what they're doing with their virtual teams, is if they can get to a point where they are elevating one of those asynchronous teammates into a manager so that the company can be having meetings with teammates without you having to, that's been a huge win, because that person, most of those people who don't work US hours, there's a little bit of overlap, but
Right.
they'll have meetings with their like doer teammates on more of the weeds level of things. And then as a manager, they will be joining certain like US meetings with me and my leadership team. And so I share that because one common pain point that we start to hear after business owners and lawyers start to fall in love with VAs is, this is great, but I don't have enough time to meet with all of them and get the work done that I need to do. Like all of the time savings is starting to turn into like me doing meetings. And so that's just a really great fix and level up. Is great. Let's find one of those rock star VAs that you have and elevate them to lead the rest.
I look forward to when I'm doing that. I genuinely do. Like I'm really enjoying the remote, and we work synchronously, my EA and I, and
That's great.
really beneficial. But it's been my experience so far that, and in the past working with some remote team members, that it's so incumbent upon you, the owner of the business or whoever is leading the VA, to change who you are in many ways in order to be a successful remote leader. I'm not talking about dramatic personality change, but I've noticed that the working modality is different, especially if you have overseas VAs. So I'd be curious, from your perspective, what can a law firm owner do to be a successful partner in that relationship?
As I think about how to effectively answer that question, I want to just point out that if you're hearing all of this and you're like, this all sounds great in theory, but I've got a type of law firm where we make more than enough money to, as a baseline, just pay US teammates and like that all works. Great. That's awesome if you can do that and if that works for you and if it's profitable. We leaned into this hard because there is no way that I could have the business that I have relying on the typical US teammate. So just for some context, Indie Law has, I think, about 25 people on the team. Over half of them are VAs. Most of them are part-time, cover for each other. And then I'm still the only employee.
Wow.
So it's a very unique structure, and I don't know how much longer it's going to change or it's going to stay that way as we continue to level up. But it does allow for certain types of freedom that I get to enjoy that I don't know how I would have been able to with the type of business model and revenue that we're at now. So the fact that I can take a month off and go to Sicily, Italy, Europe, wherever, and the business can still function without me, is because of our overseas VA strategy.
I like that. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that question about how you can be a successful partner, because clearly that's something that you've built for yourself, and I'm guessing there are some mistakes that have been made along the way, et cetera, to learn from. So how can we all be successful partners to VAs?
So I would say that the most important thing that probably needs to exist no matter what, but I think is just especially important when you're bringing on VAs, is to honor the onboarding and training process, and not to get really impatient with, I need help and a big expert right now. How can I make that happen? The reason why we love VAs is because they can benefit off of our internalized skill set and processes, and over time become masters that we can, and I don't say this in a judgy way, make an insane profit off of. At the end of the day, in order for the business to be profitable, it needs to profit off of everyone's time, including mine.
Yes.
And we are continuing to get better at measuring our ROI on teammates, but it becomes so much easier to know that there's an ROI when your VA that is managing your other VAs is being paid $15 an hour.
Which is a really good number for people who are, referentially, that is really good pay, especially say over in the Philippines.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, at that point, they're competing with like doctors' wages. And if you were to pay an average manager in the US, you're looking at what, $35, $40+ an hour?
Yeah, comfortably.
And probably having to pay them full time instead of part time. There's
Burden
just a
rate
lot
applies.
of benefits to it. But because of that, we really do honor our training process, which is for most new teammates, for most roles, we really stick to this idea of how can we train you up over a 3-month period from comprehension to proficiency to mastery. We don't look for who's a super great expert who we can hire them and we can just throw money at them and they'll do a great job. It's more about how can we slow down to speed up later? How can we make sure that we are not just throwing money at problems, but delegating and training up on our solutions?
I think one of the things at least for a lot of clients I work with, one of the things that they struggle with, quite frankly, is the initial point of imagination when it comes to working with a VA. They get the idea of, oh, I could hire a marketing VA. I could hire an executive assistant VA, right? And it was funny. I was having this back and forth, Joey, with a client of mine. It was almost became like a semantics thing about, was an EA a VA, and was a VA automatically an EA? I was like, well, VA is the umbrella category. EA is one of the specifics, right? We had to iron that out. But I think a struggling point sometimes is the imagination of like, what can I assign to my virtual assistant? And we get stuck maybe in an existing modality that we already have. What can a firm owner do to think more expansively, have a greater imagination about not just what is possible once they've hired a VA, but what is possible that a VA could be doing for them in the future?
Oh, man. So I'm going to ask something. I'm going to bring something up. I don't know where this is going to take the conversation.
Sweet. I love it already.
Charlie and I we've had some great conversations, but we haven't touched yet on like the woo-woo side of being in business and like manifesting and stuff. And I am continuing to lean into that more and more. And one of my main coaches is very into manifestation to high woo stuff. I just got back from a conference where a room of 1,000 people were all bending spoons together during a meditation. I share that because people who are interested or maybe resisting that kind of stuff can say, like, how do I manifest? Or I wanted X, but it didn't happen for me. My coach likes to say that you are always manifesting. It's not about choosing to manifest or not, but you're always thinking about either what you want or what you don't want. And wherever your attention is, the universe, God, love, whatever, tends to just give you what you're ready for. And so I like to start from a place of, if I could wave a magic wand,
Mm-hmm.
what could I potentially get off of my plate? Not because I'm super lazy and I don't want to do anything, but it's just like, how cool would it be if I figured out a way to crack a code and like have this
Yes.
happen?
Yes.
And I'm now starting to operate and move forward where if I come up with a what if, that is a sign that there probably is a way to delegate it.
I
I'm
like that.
also a huge fan of Zelda. I don't play a ton of video games, but I love the new Zelda games.
They're good.
And there's a lot of puzzles in Zelda, and sometimes when I need to like take a break from business but still work on like my entrepreneurial muscle, I'll play one of those Zelda puzzles because it gets me into the mindset of there is already a solution built into the puzzle.
Oh. Oh, that's good.
And so it's like the fact that I even have this idea means that there is a way to make it happen.
That's so good. That lives up there right now. That with recently I've been really into inversion thinking. Um, Charlie Munger, who recently
Tell me more
passed, was
about
very
that.
inversion thinking is instead of asking the classic one would be instead of figuring out how you would do something like how would I launch a new course, a new membership program.
Mm.
Instead, we say, how would I not launch a new membership program? And now we go through and we look at, well, I wouldn't do this. I wouldn't do this. I wouldn't do this. I wouldn't do this. And suddenly you're left with exactly the pieces that make up the puzzle you've been trying to build.
Mm.
Or
Yes.
why would I buy this stock now becomes, why would I not buy this stock? And now we use that as our challenge format to go, well, those aren't really problems. I would get this. Or, yeah, it turns out it would be terrible.
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that. I also think it's helpful just from a mindset approach. I think that especially with things like Facebook groups and other things that law firms have at the ready now, sometimes there's a sense of, I want to do X, who has a good process for it?
Mm-hmm.
And it's top of mind for me because earlier this year, I was at an event where, as just a part of like an exercise for the businesses that were attending to see what the person who ran the event, like how he runs his team meetings, they were planning for a big event later in the year, and just on stage, they brought up their team and had a conversation about what could happen. Like they all just kind of fired off like cool ideas for what they could do, and it was a very like improv-y yes and conversation.
Awesome.
And when they were done, they were like, all right, what went through your heads? And I shot up my hand and I was like, that is such a freeing thing to see happen, because sometimes I feel like a business owner, like a law firm owner, that there is just some Google Doc out there with all of these how-tos that I just need, someone has it. And if I just pay the right person 10K, 50K, whatever, I'll get access to the thing. But that's not how the most successful, most impactful businesses are run. They don't come from a place of, what is the script for how to do that, and let's follow it. It's much more of a, if we could dream up and just get creative about this, what could we do to put our own flavor into it?
I love that. I love that.
And I'll share a specific example of what that's turned into. So for any trademark attorneys who are listening, you can relate, but we, as a trademark firm, there's not a ton of like pleadings and legal documents that we have to put together.
Right.
But when a trademark application gets filed, over 50% of them do receive what's called an office action, where there's like an initial refusal of some kind or something that needs to be changed.
Gotcha.
And sometimes those require a more substantive response. And that is a pretty significant example of a type of thing that my team and I have to draft. And earlier this year, you guys, I'm learning this too. I learned that I was throwing a lot of money at the problem. I was paying contract attorneys to work on those things, and we were just losing a lot of profit from that as the firm grew and we were taking on more clients. And so I was like, okay, how can we create a process that simplifies this, get more VAs involved potentially, and change things so that it goes from when this happens, some attorney has to start from scratch on it, to how can we get something in place so that they have a pretty solid starting draft. And so what we did was we created a process which includes what we now call our office action response accordion template.
I like it.
And so it has all of the major sections that tend to be included that may or may not be relevant. And so once someone identifies the main arguments that we want to make, we just cut over like 70% of that accordion template document, and we're left with a really great starting point of the main case law that's included.
I love that. That's good. That's so good. All right, Joey, I have one last question that I have to ask you. It's the sign-off question for the show. But before that, I want to know, how can people who are interested in learning more about you, about either one of your businesses, or want to connect with you, where should we point them to?
Oh, thank you. Well, you can absolutely go to skybreakergroup.com. You can book a free call with my team and I there. You can also find me on pretty much all the socials at the Joey Vitale.
Excellent. And Joey, last question for you. What are you reading, watching, and listening to these days?
Oh, man. For all of the above?
Just one thing for each of them. What are you reading, watching, and listening to?
Okay.
I find that successful people are always curious about this part of other successful people.
Yes. In terms of what I'm reading, as we talked about, I've kind of been dipping my toes into the manifesting world, but I'm going all in next year.
Awesome.
And so I have a reading list of a bunch of just like money mindset books that I'm diving into.
Sweet.
Over the next month. A really great one is called Dollars Flow to Me Easily. I think I've got the wording on that one right. It's a quick read, but awesome.
Cool.
What am I watching?
What are you watching and what are you listening to?
In terms of what I am watching, I don't watch a lot of businessy stuff, but I do love Survivor, and my wife and I are getting on the Fargo train.
Go. Love it.
And then in terms of what I am listening to, again, this is going to be a manifesty high woo year for me. And one of my coaches, pro tip to anybody who has coaches or looking for programs, one thing that's really hot right now is it's called private podcasts.
Yes.
And so one of my coaches has a private podcast that's a 30-day mind your money exercise. So every day there's just a little like 5 to 15 minute exercise or thing that you can do to work on your money mindset. So that's the main thing that I'm listening to.
Those are all fantastic. And I always appreciate when an entrepreneur shares that they're enjoying something entertaining in their lives, because I actually believe that we can glean a lot of lessons, ideas, and oh, by the way, just simple energy and enjoyment in life by tuning into something that isn't just, all right, I got to be focused on pure entrepreneurship content all the time. Even the greatest legends of marketing, advertising, entrepreneurship, etc., they do enjoy a good movie every now and then, it turns out.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Joey, thank you so much for being on the show. I cannot wait to interact with you more in this next year, and I'm sure we'll produce some cool stuff.
I'm looking forward to it. Thanks again for having me. I know you got to go, Charlie, but anybody who's listening, if you haven't left a review on the podcast yet, please do so.
You're a mensch. I appreciate you, Joey. Thank you so much. And we will see you all in the next episode of They Don't Teach This in Law School.